You know the feeling, even if you cannot name it, that tight grip in your chest, that moment where you pause before defending yourself, the voice in your head whispering, "What if they are right?" You said no, but it did not feel like a choice. You tried to explain, but somehow ended up apologizing for things you did not do. They smiled as if nothing happened, but you walked away shattered, and yet you are the one who feels sorry. This is not love. This is not kindness. This is a tactic. Manipulation tactics rarely show their face directly. They do not scream or break windows. They smile. They use guilt-tripping as a blade carved from words shaped by silence and driven by the very morality you hold close to your chest. They do not need to threaten you, because your mind does it for them. They make you believe that hurting them makes you a monster. But ask yourself, what kind of person makes you feel like the villain for finally choosing yourself? This is not miscommunication. This is psychological control. This is guilt, weaponized. You might think guilt is always a noble signal, a sign that you care, a reminder of your conscience. But what if I told you that guilt can be programmed, shaped, and turned against you? That people can learn your kindness like a map, then use it to trap you in an endless cycle of self-blame? What if the reason you feel guilty is not because you did something wrong, but because someone made you believe you did? These manipulation tactics are not random. They are structured, intentional, and disturbingly effective. Guilt-tripping is not a childish mind game. It is a mature, calculated form of emotional manipulation. And the worst part, it often comes from the people you love the most. Your partner, your parent, your mentor, sometimes even your child. Psychologists have long studied the mechanics behind guilt, but they rarely explore the horror of its misuse. When guilt becomes the chain used to walk you like a dog, obedient, apologetic, and quiet, you are no longer living by your value. You are living by someone else's rules, written in invisible ink, enforced by disappointment, and sealed with a smile. You might believe you are strong, aware, even educated, but guilt is not a matter of intelligence. It is a matter of wiring. Manipulators know that shame is louder than logic, that silence makes your thoughts scream, that kindness, when twisted, becomes a leash. So here is the haunting question. If guilt is a reaction to wrongdoing, why do you feel guilty even when you have done nothing wrong? Stay with this thought. Sit in the discomfort. Do not look away, because in the next moments, you are going to discover something most people never dare to face: the truth behind how guilt-tripping works, and why your mind has become its battlefield. And before we get there, I want you to think of one moment, just one, where you walked away from someone feeling like the bad person, even though you knew deep down you were just trying to protect yourself. Hold on to that moment, because it might be the very proof you need. You were raised to be good. Not just good, obedient, selfless, kind to a fault. You were taught that a good person always considers others first, that a good person never hurts someone else's feelings, that when someone cries because of you, the decent thing to do is to feel bad, apologize, make it right, even if you were not wrong, especially if they seem hurt. This belief is not just a parenting method. It is a framework that society pours into you from the start. Every storybook, every teacher, every whispered warning from an adult embeds this quiet rule. If someone is upset, you probably did something to cause it. But here is the lie. Hurt feelings are not always your fault. Guilt does not always mean you did wrong, and empathy can be hijacked. What they never told you, what they avoided saying, is that there are people in this world who understand exactly how guilt works, and they use it, not in theory, not by mistake, but as a deliberate form of power. They do not need strength. They do not need logic. They just need you to keep believing that feeling bad makes you a better person. Because when you believe that, you become easy to control. These are the people who master manipulation tactics, not with rage, but with wounded sighs, trembling voices, and moments of silence that make your stomach turn. They specialize in guilt-tripping, an emotional trap where your very desire to do good becomes the prison that keeps you apologizing, explaining, pleasing. It is a subtle form of emotional manipulation, and it works best on people like you, people with empathy, people with values, people who carry the weight of others' emotions like it is their duty. Psychologist George Simon, in his work on covert aggressive personalities, noted that manipulators often bypass reason and go straight for emotional leverage. They do not need to prove you did something wrong. They just need to act like you did, because in your mind, their pain becomes your evidence. You begin to question yourself. You start to rewrite events in your head, not based on facts, but based on how bad they seem to feel afterward. You downplay your needs, erase your boundaries, and label yourself selfish for even having limits. That is the true effectiveness of guilt tripping. It does not demand obedience. It invites you to give it willingly, in the name of kindness. And it does not stop with individuals. Entire belief systems, cultures, even religious doctrines have leveraged guilt as a means of control. If you love me, you would not say that. If you were truly loyal, you would not leave. If you had any respect, you would not question this. The phrases vary, but the pressure remains the same. Feel bad, and then give in. This is how psychological control operates in the shadows, not by overt domination, but by emotional hijacking. And when guilt becomes the steering wheel of your behavior, you are not living authentically. You are reacting to a script you did not write, but feel responsible for performing. The deeper truth: they never had to break you. They just had to convince you to break yourself.
Now take a moment. Think about someone in your life who always seems to leave you feeling confused after every interaction. Not furious, not betrayed, just drained. And guilt. What if that feeling is not your conscience? What if it is your conditioning? If this section stirred something inside you, an old conversation, a recent silence, a relationship you keep excusing, take a breath, then share your story in the comments. You are not alone, and more importantly, you are not crazy. This is manipulation. These are guilt-tripping tactics, engineered to make you doubt your own moral compass. Subscribe if you want to keep exposing the patterns, not for entertainment, but for survival. This is not about drama. This is about psychological defense. Because once you see the blueprint, you cannot unsee it. And the next part of that blueprint is buried in your biology. Guilt is not just a feeling. It is a biological signal. It triggers the same survival systems that once helped us form alliances, stay accepted in our tribe, and avoid exile. It is ancient, and for thousands of years, guilt kept us accountable. But today, it is one of the most exploited systems in the human brain, a lever used in modern manipulation tactics, disguised as morality. To understand how guilt tripping works on a neurological level, we need to look at the machinery beneath your conscience. When you feel guilt, the amygdala fires, the same structure responsible for fear, threat detection, and emotional memory. It does not ask for context. It does not care about justice. It registers threat and distress. If someone cries in front of you, acts disappointed, or shows emotional pain, your amygdala reacts. You feel alarmed. You freeze. Your brain assumes you are the cause. The prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, tries to intervene, calculate fairness, weigh both sides. But guilt is rarely logical. It is fast, emotional, and trained from early childhood. By the time you try to analyze what just happened, the emotional decision has already been made, and most of the time, your reaction is to take responsibility, just to end the discomfort. Guilt is not always wrong. In healthy relationships, it can be a moral compass, but in toxic relationships, it becomes a chain. A 2014 study published in Cognitive, Affective and Behavioral Neuroscience found that guilt activates neural patterns linked to both pain perception and social rejection. In other words, your brain reacts to guilt as if you have been physically harmed and socially ostracized, even if the other person simply said, "I am disappointed in you." That is why manipulators do not need to yell. They only need to imply that you let them down. The brain does the rest. This is how manipulation tactics work without confrontation. Guilt tripping
takes advantage of your brain's need for resolution, your aversion to conflict, and your desire to be seen as good. And when repeated over time, it can change your behavioral patterns entirely. You might start checking every message 3 times before sending it. You replay conversations in your head over and over. You apologize before being accused. You stop speaking your mind, not out of fear but out of guilt for possibly upsetting someone. This is not you being overly sensitive. This is the result of neurological conditioning, a concept known as neuroplasticity. Your brain's ability to rewire itself means that the more you respond to guilt by submitting, the more automatic that response becomes. And if someone consistently uses guilt-tripping as a form of emotional manipulation, your brain eventually normalizes it as a survival strategy. So the question is not, why do you feel so guilty? The real question is, who trained you to feel that way? And before you think it is all in your past, consider how often it happens in your daily life. Think of the coworker who always frames things like, "I guess I will just do it myself then." Think of the friend who says, "If you were really my friend, you would have come." These are not random frustrations. These are examples of socially accepted guilt-tripping, reinforced by unspoken consequences. Modern psychology now sees guilt, especially false guilt, as one of the core triggers in emotional abuse cycles. It is not dramatic, and it is not loud. It is subtle. It works by making you question yourself just enough every time. So ask yourself now, is the guilt you feel helping you grow, or is it keeping you small? Because if it is the second, your brain may have been hijacked by a manipulator who knew exactly what they were doing. And it does not stop with feelings. It reaches deeper into memory, identity, and even reality itself. There is a moment, subtle, invisible, when guilt is no longer yours, but someone else's. A moment when blame is passed to you without words. A moment when their shame becomes your burden, and you carry it, not knowing it was never meant to be yours. This is the mirror of guilt. Manipulation tactics rely on this mirror more than any other tool, not through shouting or accusation, but through psychological projection and role reversal. The manipulator feels guilt, or should, for their behavior, their cruelty, their neglect. But instead of facing it, they flip it. They hold it up like a mirror and reflect it onto you. Suddenly, you are defending yourself. You are justifying your boundaries. You are explaining why you needed space, time, freedom, as if those things are crimes, and they watch carefully, patiently, as you try to convince them you are not the bad one. But they never said you were, did they? That is how guilt-tripping works at its most powerful, without accusation, without evidence, just subtle emotional cues that force you to fill in the blanks, the sigh, the silence, the changed tone, and most importantly, the sense that you let them down. Again, in psychoanalytic theory, projection is when someone attributes their own unacceptable feelings to someone else. A manipulator, rather than facing their own selfishness or fear of abandonment, accuses you directly or indirectly of being selfish, cold, or cruel. And because you are emotionally invested, you believe them. You take on the role. This reversal becomes your emotional script. You internalize the guilt. You replay conversations, not to understand them, but to identify what you missed, what you did wrong, even if there was nothing. It is not about the facts anymore. It is about the emotional dynamic. And it is easy to miss, because manipulators often appear emotionally hurt. Their vulnerability is weaponized. They may cry, withdraw, or go quiet. They may say things like, "I guess I just care more than you do," or "You are always looking for a reason to leave." But these are not genuine reflections. They are forms of psychological tools designed to reverse the emotional balance and put you on trial in your own mind. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people, but in guilt manipulation, hell is what other people convince you to do to yourself." You become both prisoner and warden, guilty and ashamed, all while trying to be good enough for someone who is emotionally punishing you for your independence. Here is the part that most people miss: when someone consistently turns your strength into a flaw. your voice into defiance, your honesty into cruelty. They are not just manipulating you, they are rewriting your identity. And that is no longer a relationship, that is psychological warfare. So ask yourself now, are you really the villain in their story, or are you the mirror they are too afraid to face? Do not rush past that question. Let it settle in the space behind your thoughts, where guilt tends to live, because the moment you see the reversal, the illusion begins to fracture. But breaking the mirror is only the beginning. What happens when even their apology is part of the manipulation? You want to believe the apology is real, that it came from reflection, remorse, an acknowledgement of pain, maybe even love, because everyone deserves a second chance, right? But what if the apology is not a bridge back to connection, but a tool of control? In the dark reality of manipulation tactics, apologies are not always what they appear to be. For guilt tripping to work long-term, it requires one essential element, hope, and a manipulative apology is designed to keep hope alive, just long enough for you to stay in the cycle. They say sorry, they look sincere, their voice trembles, they admit just enough. But then, they pivot. I am sorry I made you feel that way. I guess I am just a terrible person. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? Notice the pattern. The apology becomes a performance, not a transformation, a strategy, not a surrender. This is not about accountability. It is about resetting the emotional balance in their favor. If you keep pressing the issue, they turn the guilt back on you. Why are you bringing this up again? Why can you not forgive me? Why are you making me feel worse than I already do? In clinical psychology, this is often referred to as emotional baiting, a manipulation tactic where an apology is used to diffuse confrontation, only to reframe the conversation so that the victim becomes the aggressor. You are no longer discussing what hurt you. Now you are being guilt-tripped for not accepting their remorse quickly enough. This reversal is subtle. You are painted as unforgiving, difficult, even emotionally cold, while they get to walk away appearing humble, pained, and emotionally fragile, and the guilt settles back on your shoulders. Now you are comforting them again, explaining yourself, lowering your voice, and all the while, the original offense remains unresolved, untouched, unaccounted for. This kind of apology is especially dangerous because it gives the illusion of closure without offering any real change. It satisfies your longing for resolution while quietly preserving their power. And the next time it happens, and it will, the same script repeats. You may have even learned to accept this pattern as normal. After all, they seem so emotional when they apologize. Maybe you expect too much. Maybe they really are trying, but trying is not the same as changing. And weaponized apologies are not mistakes, they are tactics. A 2017 study, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, explored the concept of non-apology apologies, statements that mimic remorse but shift focus away from the offender's behavior. These types of apologies were shown to increase the likelihood of the offended party forgiving, even when the issue remained unresolved, because of our social conditioning to respond to the words "I am sorry" with grace. The brain, once again, fills in the gaps. It registers the apology, it feels relief. It tells you it is okay to move on, but your body knows. The tension does not leave, the pattern does not change. And here lies the deeper problem. If every apology leaves you feeling more confused, more uncertain, more guilty than before, you are not receiving closure, you are being manipulated into compliance. Ask yourself, does their apology ever include a plan to change, or just a plea for you to stop talking about it? You are not crazy for doubting their sincerity. You are not heartless for wanting more than words. You are not wrong for noticing that every "I'm sorry" comes just before things go back to the way they were. And if this apology is a weapon, then every time you forgive without reflection, you are disarming yourself in a psychological war you did not start. But what happens when this war is being waged by those closest to you? You do not expect it from them. You expect guilt tripping from strangers. from petty co-workers, from people who do not really know you. But when it comes from someone who helped shape your identity, someone who told you what love is, what family means, what God wants, it hits differently. That is what makes it powerful. The most effective manipulation tactics do not come from enemies. They come from those who sit across the dinner table, who share your bed, who stand at the altar and speak of virtue. Because when guilt comes from someone who claims to love you, it feels like a judgment passed by truth itself. Parents, they raised you, fed you, gave you their time, their effort, maybe even their dreams. So when they say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're breaking your mother's heart," it does not sound like manipulation. It sounds like emotional truth. You were raised to honor them, to see their suffering as a cost they paid for your existence. But that kind of guilt-tripping is not love. It is debt collection. When love becomes a transaction, when affection becomes a tool of leverage, when your freedom feels like betrayal, what you are experiencing is not guidance, it is control. Many parents, even without malicious intent, use guilt to maintain emotional influence over their children well into adulthood. It is not about nurturing anymore. It is about staying relevant, powerful, needed. Partners. Intimacy can blur boundaries. You share your vulnerabilities, open your secrets, bind your lives, and so when guilt enters this space, it often arrives masked as devotion. "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have said that." Or, "Why do I always have to be the one trying?" These phrases do not provoke thought, they provoke guilt. Guilt-tripping in romantic relationships is often subtle, but it corrodes trust faster than betrayal. The manipulative partner presents themselves as the emotionally wounded one, fragile, self-sacrificing, hurt by your actions. But this pain is performative. It is weaponized, and over time, it conditions you to prioritize their feelings over your own truth. You stop disagreeing. You filter your needs. You anticipate their disappointment before you even speak. You are no longer a partner. You are a performer in a script you never wrote. And then there are the pastors, not just religious leaders, but anyone in a position of moral or spiritual authority. These figures operate with an even deeper kind of power. When guilt-tripping is wrapped in the language of sin, virtue, or eternal consequence, it transcends manipulation. It becomes spiritual blackmail. You're letting God down. A true believer wouldn't question this. You're hurting the community. These statements are not about helping you grow. They are about keeping you obedient. And they work, because the guilt is existential. It makes you feel like your doubts are betrayals, like your questions are proof of failure. But the truth is, guilt does not make you righteous. Guilt, when manipulated, makes you easier to control. These archetypes, the parent, the partner, the pastor, are not evil by default. Many believe they are doing the right thing, that their manipulation tactics are justified, that their guilt-tripping is discipline, or care, or spiritual duty. But intention does not erase impact, and emotional control, no matter how noble it sounds, still control. Ask yourself now, when you make a choice for yourself, who is the first person you imagine being disappointed? That answer may tell you everything, because the people who are supposed to teach you freedom are often the ones who taught you to fear it. And once that fear is internalized, it becomes a debt you can never seem to repay. It begins quietly, not with a demand, but with a gesture, a favor done for you, a sacrifice made, a moment where someone went out of their way, gave more than they needed, stayed when they could have left, and they do not ask for anything in return, not yet. But you feel it anyway, the pressure, the unspoken weight. That is how emotional debt is created, not through agreement, but through implication. And manipulators are experts at turning kindness into currency. In the realm of manipulation tactics, guilt-tripping becomes most effective when it hooks into something unresolved. Your sense of obligation, the feeling that you owe them, that you are in debt, that every step you take toward independence somehow robs them of what they gave. It does not matter if they never say it outright. It lives in the silence, Transactional analysis, a psychological theory developed by Eric Berne, explores how adult relationships often mirror parent-child dynamics. In emotional manipulation, this becomes literal. The manipulator becomes the parent figure, the giver, the one who knows better, and you become the child, indebted, dependent, hesitant to disappoint. They may remind you of what they have done. After all I've sacrificed. They may minimize your pain compared to theirs. You think you had it hard, or worse. They say nothing at all but make you feel selfish every time you set a boundary. This is the cycle of emotional debt, and like all debt, it compounds. You start repaying it with small things. Silence instead of disagreement, compliance instead of resistance. You stop asking for space. You avoid anything that might look like betrayal, because in your mind, you still owe them time, energy, loyalty, yourself. But the interest never stops building, because the debt was never real. Guilt-tripping thrives on this illusion that kindness must be repaid with submission, that sacrifice must be honored with silence, that if someone gave to you, you are forever responsible for their happiness. This is not gratitude. This is psychological control. It is important to understand that real love does not create debt. It does not itemize. It does not keep score. But emotional manipulators keep perfect records, and they use them when you try to break free. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that individuals who experienced high levels of emotional indebtedness were significantly more vulnerable to relationship coercion. The guilt they felt, often over imagined or exaggerated sacrifices, kept them tethered to unhealthy dynamics. You may even feel it now, a hesitation before saying no, a tightening in your chest when you imagine disappointing someone. That is not your conscience. That is conditioning. The guilt you feel may not belong to you. It may have been planted, watered, and cultivated by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And here is the twist. The more you try to pay the debt, the more it grows. Because the moment you feel like you have finally repaid it, the manipulator changes the terms, the goalpost moves, the rules shift. Suddenly, it is not about what they did for you, it is about how ungrateful you are for not doing more. Ask yourself, how much of your exhaustion is from carrying emotions that were never yours to hold? You are not selfish for setting limits. You are not cruel for saying no. You are not in debt for being loved. But as long as you believe that guilt equals gratitude, the cycle continues. And the worst part, over time, that borrowed guilt becomes the voice inside your own head. It does not happen all at once. The voice inside you, the one that used to protest, to push back, to say this is not okay, does not disappear. It just gets quieter, weaker, afraid. That is the final stage of guilt-tripping, the deeper layer of manipulation tactics, not to silence your words, but to silence your thoughts, to condition your inner voice until it no longer speaks in your favor. At first you feel the need to explain yourself, to defend, to clarify. You still believe that if you can just make them understand, they will see your side. But they never really do. And each time you try, you walk away feeling worse. Not because of what you said, but because of how they made you feel for saying it. So slowly, your voice begins to retreat. You stop standing up for yourself, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. You already know how they will react. The disappointment, the silence, the subtle emotional withdrawal. You learn to predict the guilt-tripping before it even begins, so you save them the trouble. You correct yourself before they have the chance to. This is learned helplessness, a psychological condition first identified by Martin Seligman in 1967. When a person is subjected to repeated emotional or psychological discomfort that they feel unable to change, they eventually stop trying. They internalize powerlessness. They convince themselves that resistance is futile, even when it is not. And in manipulation, this is not accidental. It is the goal. Manipulators do not want a fight. They want submission, but not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that looks like agreement, but feels like defeat, the kind that keeps you around present in body but erased in voice. Every time you avoid a topic, every time you apologize before speaking, every time you give in just to keep the peace, your resistance weakens, not because you lack strength, but because they convinced you it is dangerous to use it. Think back. How many times have you swallowed your truth to protect someone else's comfort? How many times have you chosen silence, not because you agreed, but because you knew what would follow if you spoke? That is not emotional maturity. That is psychological damage. And over time, their guilt-tripping voice becomes your own. You hear them in your head, even when they are not there. The question forms, what would they think if I did this? The imagined reaction plays out. You censor yourself. You compromise before the conversation even happens. You are not protecting the relationship. You are protecting yourself from the reaction you have been trained to expect. This is not love. This is not respect. This is survival. And if you find yourself explaining your truth in a way that sounds like an apology, know this: your voice is not gone. It is waiting. It is still there, beneath the layers of guilt, beneath the conditioning. But to hear it again, you must be willing to sit in the discomfort of their disapproval. You must be willing to break the pattern they spent years building. Ask yourself now, what would your voice say if it was not afraid of the consequences? Do not answer too quickly. Let that question haunt you a little. Because once your voice returns, you may begin to realize something even more terrifying: that guilt was never just a feeling. It was the cage. You cannot escape a prison if you do not know you are inside one. And that is the genius of guilt-based manipulation tactics. They do not look like chains, they look like kindness. They feel like loyalty, they sound like love. That is why most people never break free, because they are too busy proving they are good people to notice how much they are being used. But breaking free is not rebellion, it is clarity. The first crack in the illusion is awareness, recognizing the pattern, catching yourself in the cycle, noticing how you feel after certain conversations, not what was said, but what was left behind, the nausea, the confusion, the shame, the way your shoulders drop, not with peace, but with defeat. That is where it begins. You do not need a dramatic confrontation. You do not need to expose the manipulator. That is not freedom. Freedom begins inside your own mind, with one realization: I am not responsible for someone else's discomfort when I honor my truth. That is the opposite of what guilt-tripping teaches you. Manipulation tactics are rooted in boundary violation, not physical boundaries, but psychological ones. Your ability to say no, to step back, to choose what is right for you without emotional punishment. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They do not shut people out. They protect the space where your voice can live. And you do not have to justify your boundaries. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your healing. If someone consistently makes you feel guilty for protecting your peace, they are not confused. They are invested in your compliance. Mental rewriting comes next. It is not easy. It takes time. You will hear the guilt voice echo in your head for weeks, months, maybe longer. But each time you respond differently, you rewire the narrative. Instead of thinking, I feel guilty for saying no, you learn to say, that guilt is evidence that I was trained to abandon myself. Instead of, I should reach out and fix this, you replace it with, I am not obligated to rescue someone who hurt me. You are not cruel for choosing peace. You are not selfish for protecting your energy. You are not broken for needing boundaries. You are healing. Psychologist Brené Brown has written extensively on shame and vulnerability. Her research confirms that guilt, when misplaced, leads to toxic shame, a state where people begin to believe they are bad, not just that they did something bad. This belief keeps people small, compliant, and disconnected from their true selves. And that is exactly where manipulators want you. But the moment you notice it, truly notice it, the spell begins to crack. You start feeling the difference between guilt that comes from violating your values and guilt that comes from disappointing someone who never honored you. And you begin to ask different questions. Instead of, what did I do wrong? You start asking, why do I feel like I owe them my silence? This is where freedom begins. Right now, take a moment. Think of one guilt you carry, something you always feel bad about, even though no one ever told you directly that you should. Write it down. Just one. A sentence, even a word. Now ask yourself, is this mine, or was it given to me? Write it in the comments if you feel ready, not for validation but for clarity. You might be surprised how many people were trained to carry the same invisible weight. And once you name it, you no longer have to hold it. But remember, breaking free is not the end. It is just the moment you stop apologizing for having a key. And that key only matters if you are ready to use it. You keep waiting for the right moment, the right day, the right conversation, the perfect balance of calm and honesty. Maybe you imagine it will happen after they are in a better mood, after things settle down, after one last chance to make it right. You are not stalling. You tell yourself, you are trying to be fair. You are trying not to hurt anyone. But here is the truth most never realize. The exit is not a door. It is a decision. Leaving a manipulative dynamic does not require the other person's agreement. You do not need permission. You do not need their understanding. You do not even need closure. You only need one thing: the courage to choose yourself in a system that taught you to feel guilty for doing so. And that choice rarely comes with applause. Manipulation tactics work precisely because they exploit your fear of being misunderstood. The manipulator knows how deeply you crave harmony. They know how much you value being good, being kind, being reasonable. So they build a maze inside your mind, where every path toward freedom makes you feel like a villain. But that is the illusion. Freedom will not feel good at first. It will feel heavy, lonely, like betrayal, because guilt-tripping wires your emotions to associate your peace with someone else's pain. So when you finally choose peace, you expect punishment, not from them, but from yourself. That is why it is a decision, not an escape. There is no door, no dramatic exit, no need to slam anything. You simply stop playing the game. You step out of the emotional role you were trained to perform. And sometimes you do it silently. A conversation may never happen. An apology may never come. But your clarity becomes your release. Philosopher Viktor Frankl once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose." Manipulation tactics thrive in spaces that feel too small to breathe. But you always have a choice, even when the guilt screams louder than your instincts. You may still care about them. You may still hope they change. That is human. That is love. But you cannot heal in a system that benefits from your silence. Your boundary is not an attack. It is an announcement. I am no longer available to be controlled by guilt. And no, they might not accept it. They might push back. They might guilt-trip you one last time, maybe forever. But that is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are free. This moment is about reclaiming authorship, about writing your own story, instead of being cast as the problem in someone else's. And that begins with one brave, silent shift. The moment you stop negotiating with your own intuition. So ask yourself now quietly, am I waiting for a door that does not exist? Because if you are, the exit might already be beneath your feet. Not a doorway, not an escape, just a decision. And if you are still unsure, still haunted by that voice, that guilt, that fear, there is one final thought that remains. You have been carrying guilt that never belonged to you. Now what would it feel like to put it down? Somewhere along the way, you forgot what your own guilt felt like. Not the kind they handed you, not the kind they whispered into your mind with words like selfish, ungrateful, or disrespectful, but the real kind, the moral signal that comes when you know, deep down, you have violated your values. That guilt is honest, it is rare, it is clean. But the guilt you carry now, the one that wakes you in the middle of the night, the one that makes you question your worth, the one that forces you to explain yourself for simply needing peace, that guilt is a ghost, a shadow. It was never yours. Manipulation tactics like guilt-tripping are not just emotional tricks. They are systems of distortion. They blur reality. They make you forget where someone else's emotions end and yours begin. And over time, you begin to treat every discomfort, every disappointment, every distant sigh from another person as your personal failure. This is not sensitivity, it is emotional possession. Guilt is no longer a tool for accountability. It becomes the leash tied around your identity, and every time you grow, every time you speak truth, every time you try to free yourself, the leash tightens. But now you see it, you see the pattern, you know the difference between guilt that corrects and guilt that controls, between apologies that heal and apologies that silence, between love that holds space and love that holds you hostage. You are not broken for being manipulated. You are not weak for believing them. Guilt-tripping works because it hijacks your best qualities: empathy, conscience, kindness, the desire to do right. You were targeted not because you are flawed, but because you are human. Now it is time to return to that humanity, to stop rewriting yourself around someone else's discomfort, to stop shrinking every time someone else's emotions flare, to stop carrying pain that was handed to you under the disguise of virtue. You are not obligated to feel guilty for having needs. You are not required to be silent in order to be kind. You are not here to carry the emotional weight of people who refuse to carry their own. The guilt was never yours, and maybe you do not need a perfect explanation to let it go. Maybe it is not about finding closure or proving who was right. Maybe it is simply about no longer letting your life be shaped by the hands of someone who uses guilt as their only form of communication. Now it is your choice, not mine, not theirs, yours. If this entire journey, these words, these questions, made something inside you stir, pause for a moment. Let it settle. Now ask yourself, what would I do tomorrow if I no longer felt guilty for being who I am? That answer is yours to keep. If this video gave you something to think about, something you had not seen before, share it with someone who might still be stuck in the same invisible trap, not to fix them, but to offer them the same mirror you just held up for yourself.
Like the video if it gave you clarity. Subscribe if you are ready to keep unlearning what was never true, and share it, not with everyone, but with someone who is still waiting for permission to choose themselves.
We are not done yet, because guilt is only one tactic, and there are more games being played in plain sight.